Thank you, Lee. Fantastic talk. Another round of applause for Lee. Okay, I'm going to move us along. We're a little behind schedule, so I'm going to move us along to our next portion of the agenda, which is the lightning talks. So we're in for a treat with these. And to kick us into that next part of our agenda, I'd like to, excited to introduce to you Jacoby Cochran, who's an educator, a Southsider, and the enthusiastic senior host of CityCast Chicago. All right, folks know CityCast. All right. His essential daily news podcast was named Best of Chicago in the last 3 years by The Reader. Whether behind the mic or on stage, assuming he's equally comfortable in both places, Jacoby is a captivating performer and an award-winning storyteller. You can also catch him breaking down all things Chicago on local NPR and PBS broadcasts. A lot of NPR and PBS on our agenda today. And voicing national ads during the commercial breaks. You may follow his work at jacobycochran.com. And please welcome Jacoby. Oh, there you go.
How much I despise a bio. First and foremost, I want to give a huge thank you to Lee, who was up here before me. Make some noise for Lee, everybody. And to all of the panelists, speakers, and our Lightning Talk presenters, it is truly a pleasure to be here in front of you all. Again, my name is Jacoby Cochran. I am a professor of communications, a storyteller, and the host of CityCast Chicago, Chicago's #1 daily news podcast. The fact that there are only 4 daily news podcasts is of little to no concern to me. I am most humbled to be here today to kick off today's Lightning Talk session. This segment is intended to introduce all of us to some provocative, creative, and game-changing ideas for ways to make Chicago's future brighter for all of us. Now, as the name suggests, the goal is to spark new conversations and collaborations across disciplines with fast-paced presentations. And our presenters are a group of passionate and deeply dedicated individuals who are also excited to be here today. And I also know that they, like me, are very nervous. So let me hear the energy you're going to welcome them with. I'm looking at the presenters, and I don't think that did anything for their nerves. Each of them will go one after another, so if you are able to hold your applause to the end, it'll be appreciated. But I've also been to enough graduations in my life to know that if you are here for a particular individual, you are going to let them know. So we simply ask that you be considerate of the next speaker. Before we get things started, I must say again how truly honored I am to be here today. Many of the speakers, panelists, and moderators have been gracious enough to also sit down with me on the podcast. I explored some of Chicago's most beautiful places with Jeffrey. I learned some of the most breathtaking stories of Black Chicago resilience with Ayanna. I got to take Architecture 101 with Lee. And I learned the long, complicated history of tax increment financing, or TIF, with Rachel. Each of these conversations has reminded me that we do not live in a moment. The present is a fiction of our mind's creation that helps us to deal with the inconceivable reality that we are overwhelmed by our past and in many ways unprepared for our future. Now, in the words of our Vice President, Kamala Harris, do you think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context of all in which you live and all that comes before you. Now, we've all seen dozens of hilarious remixes on these words, And for as cliche as it may seem, a very simple truth is embedded. And that truth is that none of us are truly an individual. I know in American culture it is hard to hear that. But each and every one of us, our lives are inextricably linked to our community. You cannot understand the I without first knowing the we. And to say that in terms of Chicago, the life and legacy of this city of ours is without a doubt one of collective movement, action, and throughout our 187 years, inaction. When I was born, Chicago was already 154, an unimaginable lifetime through my personal perspective, and yet an infancy in the timeline of global cities. At this point, it had burgeoned out of Potawatomi trading routes and fields of smelly ramps, lifted the city out of the mud, burned down, rebuilt, and welcomed the world to marvel at its feats, and we aren't even through the first 75 years. As a child, I would hear of these stories alongside Jens Jensen's creations, Michael Jordan crossovers, and steel and iron masterpieces, convinced that my city could do no wrong. The innocence of a child. But as a child born onto the side of the city, often of the haves and have-nots, this rose-tinted context quickly revealed a cacophony of unfulfilled promises, half-truths, and forced obedience through the built environment. That even as engineering feats essentially moved mountains, forced migration made sure not all would experience the newly accessible sunshine. That reversing a river means someone somewhere will receive your shit. Now, at 187 years old, the unsolved problems of my childhood, my mother's childhood, my grandmother's childhood have only evolved. 50 years since we finished the construction on the once tallest building in the world, but just 12 years since we tore down the final high-rise in a lineage of disinvested and scapegoated public housing. We cannot claim one of these histories and shun the other. In the last 3 years, I have conducted 1,132 interviews with varying Chicagos about food insecurity and air quality, migration and affordable housing, baseball teams and Super Bowls of past glory. And what is most clear to me is if we do not reconcile that this city was built on both marvel and malice, then we will not have much to hope for in 50 years. The existential moment that we live in will not afford us another 50 years of collective movement and action, but mostly inaction. These presenters today give me a faith that a lifetime of unfulfilled promises can still be but a chapter in an ongoing story. In 50 years, Chicago will be 237, an unimaginable lifetime from my perspective, but potentially still in infancy in terms of global cities. But we must accept that no single author will live to see its entirety and yet must write each notation and footnote with vigor. You must realize that even as you hear me, you and I are the same thing. That I don't know the I without first knowing the we. And yet, for most of us, it is inconceivable to think 50 years back and 50 years forward and truly believe we can have an impact on both. So I simply ask you to accept today, you cannot. The present is a fiction created by your mind to deal with the inconceivable reality that the past is mostly unknown to you except through the stories of others. And the future is largely only conceivable to you through the perspectives, histories, and cultures you have been indoctrinated along the way. I'm not asking you over the next 50 years to completely suspend the fiction of your individuality. Hell, the anxiety that I am processing now is only manageable because my brain can create such beautiful fictions. But we do not need to create a fiction about our city. We need to accept the reality that regardless of perspective or lineage, the future of this city is one of collective movement and action, and hopefully not inaction. Planning for a future must not negate reconciling a past, or we will once again arrive to an incomplete moment armed with nothing but hindsight and shoulda, woulda, couldas. So at 237 years old, who will Chicago be? Many in this room must accept that they will not know that Chicago, as I did not know a Chicago before its 154th birthday. And yet, I did not fall out of a coconut tree. The entire context of my existence is built from the 154 years of Chicago and the generations of indigenous land before that incorporation, and the millennia that come after me, whether our species is here to see it or not. But again, the hope of this discipline to plan even with decades and generations of uncertainty in front of us, we must realize that to be hopeless is in many ways a privilege. It is in many ways accepting that the overwhelming feeling of this false present has handcuffed us from being able to even imagine a better future. I challenge each and every one of you in this room as you listen to these amazing speakers, allow yourself to shake the fiction of the moment. Live in the radical imagination of the future and allow yourself to dream and hope in wonder and color. Trust me, the future will be better for it. Thank you all for your time, and please put your hands together for our lightning speakers.
This is not fair. Professor, podcaster, poet, Jacoby, thank you for that. I'm Harish Patel, and before I start my presentation, I used to clean 20 years ago in this room, and it just feels amazing to still continue to call this home. I got my bachelor's and my master's degree, and many of the people who shaped my ideas of what I do today are sitting here, so it's an honor to be around my professors and friends. With that, I want to start my presentation. I do it myself, right? Okay. We'll see if technology works.
Yeah, I would definitely have more time to study, and I would have more time to actually just focus, all of my focus in school, which would be a really big help.
I want to go to certify my license because here is different standards. I want to go to the school maybe in the springtime.
Tengo dos hijas, una que ya está estudiando en la universidad y otra que se va a graduar. Sería una bastante ayuda por la parte universitaria de mis hijas.
You just heard stories of, I think you only heard two, but there were four. Four people, four of your neighbors, among 9,000 people who who get what is called a guaranteed income in this city. And a guaranteed income is a publicly funded direct cash assistance to people that comes in a predictable form. And City of Chicago, Cook County is trying this out for the past few years. This isn't just happening in Chicago. This now is happening in 35 states, serving 52,000 people. So today, there are 52,000 families getting cash in their pockets, in their bank accounts, on a monthly basis. And some of it might have impacted you, your family, your community. And there's also, cash assistance comes in many, many ways. So you think about the 150 pilots, but there might be people here who got the STIMI checks. I don't know if you got stimulus checks when COVID started. There were people who in this room probably got what is called the child tax credit if you had a kid. 60 million children in the United States got cash on a monthly basis for about 6 months a few years ago. Then it stopped because of stalemate in the federal government. For us, why I care deeply about this is because guaranteed income provides a cushion for emergencies like the one we had. And sadly, like the ones that we'll have, many more. Natural disasters, I think artificial intelligence for some families may be a disaster. The pandemic, a loss of a job, an emergency, that's what a guaranteed income or cash assistance gives you a cushion for. And I know whenever I give this talk, a version of this talk, there's always somebody in a critical thinking person, which is what you're supposed to do at universities, is thinking about how giving cash might be problematic because we don't know how these people are going to use their money. And for those people who are thinking that because you're a university, know that research, many decades, and then more recently, the past 7 years that we have done these pilots, the research shows that 91% of the money goes to rent, food, and caring for families. 91%. Some people take a vacation. Some people take a day off from their job for their birthday. That's the 9%. And I hope we live in a world in the future that many more people can go on a vacation and celebrate their kid's birthday. So I hope that the number from 9% actually doubles and quadruples in the future. I also know that climate disasters, artificial intelligence is making this more and more needed, and that more and more people are thinking about what is going to happen to them when that moment arrives at their doorstep. I also want to share with you that this idea didn't start with us 8 years ago when we funded the first pilot in Stockton, California, but that this idea is actually quite old. This man on the bottom, you might know, he's old. This idea actually started with MLK Jr. and the Black Panther Party and the National Women's Rights Organization in the 50s and 60s. And I think we only have heard about it for the past 7 years from the technology brothers, or tech bros, discussing it for us. But way before, 60 years ago, 70 years ago, 80 years ago, people were thinking about this. And beyond these folks, there's also a famous economist, Milton Friedman, who I know is very different from MLK, who also believed in this idea. And most recently, last year, President Obama endorsed this idea. And the reason I'm giving you some validation is that this idea is not an idea anymore, because 150 pilots are thinking about doing this, and that you all should consider joining the movement that is going to make this a reality in the next decade. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. So my name is David Scully. I'm an architect and urban planner, and I'm from Chicago. I grew up here, and a lot of my experience as a Chicagoan really shaped my trajectory as a professional. You know, growing up here as a lifetime Chicagoan and Southsider, I've seen so much beauty and culture and community in this city. And, you know, so much of the work that, sort of I focus on really focuses on that. But however, we're still reeling from those impacts, that Lee and everyone else, earlier talked about in more detail, that, this historic racial, segregation, design segregation, and socioeconomic organization of the city has really put a drain on communities and folks that really need it. It's really adjusted the richness and culture of the community that Chicago has. However, we still have the opportunity to address those scars by creating design, placemaking, and community based off of, sort of ideas. So I want to share an idea with you today. I guess, all right, what am I doing? Forward. There we go. Boom. So, as you see, there has been so much residue of those impacts of the racist policies that and practices that have gone on in the city of Chicago today. So you see on this map, the city of Chicago owns over 10,000 vacant lots. Around transit, a lot of those lots exist, which is opposite to what you would think as a planner, right? You usually would want to build on the assets that you have in community and in placemaking. We've seen how that really has an impact overall on just the health outcomes, unemployment, lack of opportunity in those places. And this is really personal to me. It's, learning this as a person who grew up here and understanding why those lots are vacant, why there hasn't been investment in the city. A lot of times, and it's mostly because of people. People made decisions that were intentional, that were trying to have an outcome, and that outcome was successful in a lot of ways. Well, if people can make the system, then people, us, are there to actually unmake and make a better system that's built on prosperity and community and justice. So one of the things that really sticks out to me as an example of this is the Green Line. The Green Line goes through both the south and the west side of Chicago. It was built for the Columbian Exposition in 1893 as really a pilot for future technology for transit and elevated transit in cities. It connected everyone to Jackson Park and to the fair. And it has that potential to be that catalytic again. It's been eroded over time because of, honestly, racism. This is where black and brown folks ended up, and this is where we're gonna disinvest. But if I were to tell you, without having the context of these communities, that you have a transit line that connects Jackson Park and Woodlawn, University of Chicago, Washington Park, Bronzeville, IIT, McCormick Place, downtown Chicago, Fulton Market, the United Center, the Garfield Park Conservatory in Garfield Park, Austin and Oak Park, you would imagine something that's much drastically different. That is an invested community, that you're leveraging the transit and these major assets and employers that are connected by this transit asset. However, that's not the case. Most of the places on the south and the west side in particular don't even have walkability around the transit stations. So there's an opportunity here, though, that we can leverage the transit that exists as an asset and build a prosperous community focused around and leveraging what we have in our city today. And that's one of the ideas that I have, just thinking about and living here and taking the Green Line to go to IIT from architecture degree and taking it to go to work downtown and seeing that sort of disparity and that shift in the transect of, auto-oriented to, much more dense downtown. So we have the opportunity to leverage and understand how to move that forward now. Looking at, continuing to evolve the ETOD policy and connected communities ordinances, looking at opportunities to further investment through, community wealth building and anti-displacement strategies. And we're seeing some great examples of that with projects like 43 Green, that is a multi-phase, multi-income mixed-use development, as well as Hub 32, which is a recently announced LIHTC project on the west side of Chicago. So finding opportunities to continue to do that, we can really make a vision for leveraging transit a reality. And it's going to take a lift. The resources are, as most of you know, need help. And we need to find opportunities to continue to invest in that. And it's going to take, in the words of Outkast, me, you, your mama, and your cousin too, and we all going to have to move this forward. So really appreciate it, and thank you for your time.
Oh man, this is fun. Thank you so much for the opportunity to come chat with you all today. I am a really proud graduate of the MUP program, and I really thought I should pay, I thought I should pay homage to my time in school by turning in my slides a day late and hoping that no one would notice. Sorry about that. Anyway, my name is Kalindi Parikh. I'm the strategy director at Current. Current is a water innovation hub based here in Chicago with the mission to grow an inclusive blue economy, accelerate innovation in water, and solve some of the world's pressing water challenges. All right, Great. So I'm sure everyone in the room here today has heard about the green economy and green jobs, right? Those are the jobs that we're talking about: clean energy transition, decarbonization. And I wanted to take my time today to tell you about what I think is the very important blue economy, which includes both the kinds of companies and utilities that get us our water, get it where it needs to go, make sure that it's clean, provide services and technology, but also includes the kinds of companies that use a ton of water, like manufacturing and agriculture, energy. And while other parts of the world are really struggling with water insecurity, we in the Great Lakes, we have a fifth of the world's freshwater supply right here. So that's a really big opportunity, and it's a really big, scary challenge that we really need to protect our water, but it also provides us a big opportunity to create some economic development, especially for people in places who need it. Chicago has all of the assets to be a thriving blue economy. We've got major research universities like UIC, we've got national labs, incubators, accelerators, over 250 headquarters companies. Right now in Illinois alone, the blue economy is over $16 billion industry and employs about 1.5 million people. However, just having these assets does not make it an inclusive economy. We know that with any major investment or economic development project, you really run the risk of deepening disparity if you're not very careful and you don't plan very carefully. If you don't bring communities to the table, especially the communities that you're hoping to impact, you run the risk of perpetuating an economy like we have now, where only 1% of venture investment goes to Black founders and only 2% to female founders. Or, we know, for example, that jobs in the blue economy are typically family-supporting, healthy, clean jobs. However, when we really think about, for example, the trades where, we might see, people have really good opportunities to support their families, we see who's positioned to fill those jobs, and only 8% of apprentices, registered apprentices in Chicago are Black, and only 4% are women. We would much rather see a community where we have inclusive systems where folks could have their first touch point with water, their first experience with water, and that it inspires them to have a career in this space, and they see a pathway for them into STEM careers or trades or whatever might fit them best. So I'd like to really kind of, leave you all with a really hopeful note today by telling you about Current's new plan for inclusive economic development called Great Lakes Renew. This is an ambitious 10-year plan, and it just received the National Science Foundation's largest ever investment in place-based innovation, up to $160 million over 10 years. This initiative bridges research, entrepreneurship, workforce development, all to transition the Great Lakes to a circular blue economy, meaning we believe that we can rethink what waste means in wastewater. And instead of just treating wastewater and then sending it down the road, we can recover important things like energy and nutrients for agriculture, critical minerals like lithium, cobalt, and nickel that are essential to our country's transition to clean energy, and put all of those things to really productive use. We know that water is critical to the clean energy transition, but we can't make big decisions about water without including the people and places that are most impacted by those decisions. That's why Great Lakes Renew was created as a coalition of researchers, innovators, I actually see some of you in the room today, that's really exciting, and community organizations who, across the 6 states involved, all believe that we have a collective opportunity to build an inclusive economy around a scientific innovation. So in the 2 years that we have to, show some early success, we're going to put hundreds of people through workforce training programs and STEM programs. We're going to bring big industrial water users to the table and ask them what their challenges are and how can we help them solve them, and also hold them accountable for investing in those solutions. And also support water technology entrepreneurs in taking their ideas out of a lab and into the market, solving problems locally and globally. So I'll leave you with that. If you find all of this interesting, this is really just the tip of the iceberg, not to make a water pun, but there's plenty of those. But we would love to get to know you better. We have Chicago Water Week coming up, which is a big free community-driven event, and we are also always hiring interns as well. So please get in touch. Thanks.
Hey, good afternoon. Hey. On February 27th, I walked into Leo High School. How many of you have ever been to Leo High School or heard about Leo High School? A few of you. All right, great. So you know how great it is. It's a majority Black, all-boys Catholic school on 79th and Sangamon. My teammate Tati and I were there to talk with a group of students about what they wanted to see for the future of their community. We and 8 boys from the Auburn Gresham neighborhood sat in a circle next to the stage of their brightly lit auditorium. We first asked them what they wanted to see for their families. One boy, we'll call him Jonathan, said he wanted his mom and family to be uplifted by generational wealth. Then another agreed, saying that he also wanted this for his mother. And soon, almost all the students were enthusiastically on one accord. When we asked, why generational wealth? What's the desire underneath that? They said that they wanted their moms to be stress-free, that their families to have a sense of peace and happiness, and for them to be connected and close. I was impressed by the foresight of these teenage boys and deeply touched by their love and compassion. These values and yearnings pave the way for an inspiring conversation about their community's future. When decisions are grounded in collective values and the deeper yearnings of those who live in the neighborhood, they are for the community, by the community, and benefit the community. This is the power and potential of community self-governance. Community self-governance is a system of governance where the people within the community dictate their fate. They collectively make the decisions that affect their lives and conditions without external interference. I'm Dr. Dominica McBride, founder of Become, an innovative community transformation organization that works at the intersection of social science research and community activism. And in our experience, there are many instances of community making the decision that paves the way to better futures. However, policies, systems, and external decisions and priorities often get in the way. Through various studies, and I'm sure many of you have heard about them, researchers have supported what many residents experience, that actual policy outcomes reflect the preferences of the most affluent, but bear virtually no relationship to the preferences of poor and middle-income Americans, per Marvin Gillens. In other words, political decisions are not for the people. They're often for the interests of the corporate and wealthy. These kinds of political decisions have contributed to a lot of the problems that we're talking about today. The current situation in Chicago, segregation, community violence, and racial disparities. With complete self-determination and zero reliance on existing government, decisions will be made for the community by community. They decide whether schools are closed in their community, whether liquor stores are zoned for their neighborhood, and what types of developments are done in their area. Community self-governance can serve as a remedy, a transformer, and healer for our communities. It has been shown to have many benefits From more tailored solutions to more efficiency in solving collective problems. It leads to stronger relationships, more accountability, community sustainability, a stronger sense of ownership, engagement, and leadership, and a greater sense of empowerment. And more. This is not a new concept. From a self-organization association in the Zhongshan community in China to democratic confederalism in the Rojava region in northern Syria, it's been used to sustain and uplift communities around the world. In our present state of cross-neighborhood tensions, community violence, health and education disparities, and a sense of disempowerment by many residents of Chicago, it's time for Chicago to give this a hearty try. It'll require us to shift our political paradigm, for the current governing structure to come to the table as equal partners with community members. So if you're a Block Club member, a student, like many of you here, a professor, or community organizer, you don't have to wait for government to change. We can work within our blocks, neighborhoods, and institutions to create real collective decision-making structures around the areas that we can innovate in, build, and lead together. Whether it's through governmental transformation or neighborhood-level organizing, this shift will require us to reflect deeply, to heal together, and to be bravely driven by a strong value system. As a first step, we can apply the ancient wisdom of Lao Tzu. Go to the people, live with them, learn from them, love them. Start with what they know, build with what they have. And when the work is done, the task accomplished, the people will say and know, we have done it ourselves. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Anjali. That's a long list of things. I'm Anjali. I'm a journalist and a critic. I write about the built environment here in Chicago. I was really excited to see Lee's name as a keynote. Seeing Lee's name means that this is a room full of people who must care about the future of criticism. I shouldn't have looked at that, it's very intense. So we were asked to talk about trends that could shape the future of Chicago. And so I thought I would talk about, I think, kind of a sad trend. I'm gonna click that button. The critics are vanishing. I'm saying this not like in a spooky way, like we're not being stolen. Nobody needs to make a podcast about where we went. The critics are vanishing because publications are laying them off, offering them buyouts, and not replacing us. Magazines are folding entirely or pivoting to video, as they like to say. But I don't want to talk about this trend because I'm kind of tired of it. It's pretty sad. But I want to talk about the possibilities of the future through the lens of this current predicament. The critic, generally speaking, is characterized in one way, and that is the solo voice. One publication, one critic, one city. But for the most part, this solo voice often tends to look at things that are also kind of like the solo thing, the object, the building, right? Sometimes this building is rendered, it's an image of something that is to be constructed. Oftentimes it's completed, right? It's a finished building, it's authored, and to a lot of communities it feels immovable. And to those of you architects who say things like, we build for change and transformation, that doesn't always come across clearly in a completed object. Yet, while critics are vanishing, I like to believe that there's sort of a renewed public interest in the subjects around the built environment. Issues like the housing crisis, climate collapse, and community control, or right, self-governance over land, these things have become like palatable, they've become graspable to people, and they want to know more and they want to read more.
So critics now, and I'm talking about a lot of new voices, folks who do not have the opportunities to work for major publications because they are not replacing the folks who take the buyouts. Critics now have an opportunity to talk about different things, right? We are reshaping this field, not just how we cover it, but what we cover. We are focusing on things like process, right? We're thinking about why a built-in intervention is being proposed. We're talking about bureaucracy. I know that seems boring, but right, the things like planning, zoning, and permitting that actually creates transparency or inhibits transparency in these processes. We're talking about scaled environmental and human impact, right? Temporally scaled. So we're thinking about things that are like, how much does this development create long-standing anxiety about displacement, or much further down the line's impact on local ecologies? These things are beyond the immediate evaluation of good design or job creation. We're interrogating this feasibility, right? I learned when I was covering Invest Southwest that understanding whether or not people believe that a building is actually going to be built speaks to much deeper issues of distrust. And new critics, we are asking the question, what is the thing that has caused this distrust? And of course, we can also analyze, we use the word connectivity here, but whether or not just are these projects connected to other things, but are they connected to broader political or economic visions, and whether or not those visions are the same visions that communities have for themselves. Criticism is it's like in its new possible form, it can move beyond the solo voice, right? The one voice per one publication, and ask better questions that could help us speak to how the built environment operates within or moves against democracy. So I'm going to say that critics aren't vanishing. I think that criticism is cracking open. We're making space for new voices, right? Pluralizing voices. We can just grieve the loss of the solo critic and we can move on. We're making way for new critics who want to work collaboratively, right? Who want to work with investigative journalists, financial journalists, real estate journalists, and who want to develop new relationships with community leaders and cultural leaders, environmental scientists, anthropologists, planners, activists, and so much more. Criticism is cracking open. And while we are in this really ugly, messy, kind of like pubescent is maybe a word, phase, Chicago, I think, will be better for it as we allow criticism of the past to go into the past. That's it. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeremy Cuevas, and I am the transportation organizer of the Northwest Center, which is a community-based nonprofit organization in the northwest side of Chicago, in a community called Belmont-Cragen. Anyone from the northwest side of the city? Okay, great. Awesome. I think I just clicked that. So the title of my short talk today is The Importance of Community Residents at the Forefront of Planning Processes. Do me a favor, would you turn to someone next to you and say, there is power? Oh, come on. Turn to the person next to you, there is power in community. What if I told you that real and intentional change can happen in communities across the city if the community residents were at the decision-making table? What could be different? How could this impact urban planning in the future? I have witnessed this approach and seen its fruit. I was driving home one day in 2019, and I get a phone call from one of our young people, from one of our young person's parents that we work with, telling me that their son had got doored, was riding his bike, and a vehicle was riding too close to him, so he swerved out of the way, and at the time he was swerving, another vehicle that was parked opened the door and doored him. He ended up with a dislocated shoulder, a fractured neck, a broken wrist, and thankfully he survived that crash. That was the starting point of our Bikes for Belmont-Cragen campaign where we work with a group of youth, of 60 youth, and identified transportation issues in our neighborhood. The students called Belmont-Cragen a transportation desert because out of 250 miles of bike lanes at the time, Belmont-Cragen, which is a community with over 80,000 residents, and a third of that population is under the age of 18, only had 1 mile of bike lanes. And not to mention 0 micro-mobility options like Divvy bikes. Not one station. Fast forward 2 years later, through organizing with our stakeholders, our elected officials, our small businesses, community residents, to date, Belmont-Cragen has over 15 miles of bike lanes and 13 Divvy stations. That was organized by our young people. That was organized by our youth. And in the beginning of the planning process with the Department of Transportation, our aldermen, we made it very clear to them and said, we are the experts in our community. We need to be at the decision-making table. Some of the best practices and takeaways that we saw was that the Department of Transportation, Divvy bikes, and local aldermen took notice of how our young people were organized and how they had collective power. The starting point was building relationships and trust with our local aldermen, which can be difficult at sometimes, but building trust with city agencies and our aldermen. And like I said earlier, community residents are the experts in their community. And lastly, it takes everyone to accomplish something great. So I encourage you, if you're an urban planner, if you're a person that plans for cities in the future, think about the communities and the people and the vulnerable population that will be affected with new transportation infrastructure. And I invite you to invite the community, invite young people to the meetings, invite them to the decision-making table, and we've seen what can happen in Belmont-Cragen when we do that. And it takes everyone in this room, it takes everyone in the neighborhoods to accomplish something great. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Chandra Christmas Rouse, and thank you for the invitation to be here. Redlining, contract buying, block busting, urban renewal, more accurately known as urban rescrual, predatory lending, all of this has led to intergenerational wealth extraction in our communities of color. And I believe that the solution to addressing this type of wealth extraction and creating systems change that can undo this harm is to think like an Olympic speed skater. But not just any skater, specifically Yang Jianrusu here in the red suit. This photo was taken at the 2024 Winter Youth Olympics in South Korea. Yang appears to be in last place, but what if I told you she's actually in first place? This is what it looks like to be prepared to coordinate and implement the systems change needed to address these efforts, like newly adopted policies and legislation. But let me explain first. So policy making is kind of like speed skating. Typically in speed skating, you have almost 13 laps, you start in a pack, you're jockeying for your position, and then at the end of the race, you speed up, and then you coast into your victory lap. Seems simple enough, until Yang comes along and disrupts everything. So Yang started her 13-lap speed skating cycle like every other race, slowly, but instead of waiting till the end of the race to speed up, in the second lap, she took off and completed a full lap and got to the back of the pack because she knew that she had to anticipate the work that it takes to pull everything together at the end. So when she appears to be in last place, she has in fact lapped everyone and is in first place. So now think of each lap like a phase of policymaking. First, you start to identify an issue you might want to address, you start to gather research. That could be your numbers, your narratives. Then you just start to develop policies, you're advocating, and then you start jockeying to tell the right story to the right target audience. So for policy, when we hear that last bell for the final lap of policymaking is usually when we begin to implement, right? This is when we think our most intensive work is near, because we must sprint to the finish line, but we find that we lack an understanding of how we are a part of those systems. We lack the tools to actually share the power that we just codified. We lack the space to experiment with these new relationships that we've now built to ourselves, to each other, and to power. But Yang knew that the work is in the beginning of the race, and it's in how you prepare for your victory lap. I believe that addressing systemic problems like intergenerational wealth extraction requires that we anticipate the work that it takes to implement systems change and create lasting solutions by better coordinating between these three elements of systems change: policy, process, and culture. So process, think of this as your internal and external protocols to achieve desired outcomes. Your policies, those look like your incentives and your levers to allow for that desired outcome. And now think of culture. These are the values, the stories that we tell ourselves about who we can be. These are the conditions required to create that desired outcome. All of this together creates systems change. So my team and I at MPC have built a model for more lasting policy change called Change Lab, where we prepare built environment practitioners, or soon-to-be practitioners like you all, to implement systems change in what we call preparing for that victory lap at the beginning of the race. So the first leg of our approach is about learning. How are you increasing your awareness of how you are a part of these very systems that you're organizing to change? What are the different powers and privileges that you hold? The second leg of our approach is about collaboration, co-creation. How are you building those policies in ways that you're doing it through co-design and actually sharing that? And the third leg is about experimentation, de-risking innovation through iterative prototyping. Once you complete this lap at the beginning of the race, we find that you're better prepared for that final lap of implementation and disrupt the status quo. Following Yang's historic win, commenters described it as the boldest thing they'd ever seen in sports in a long time. This is the type of bold thinking that we need in our policy making. Just like Yang, I want to disrupt our model. If you want to better implement systems change, if your organization has a policy that they're advocating for or a practice they're introducing, let's talk about how you and your team can get prepared for the victory lap of policy making, and let's be bold together. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Have you ever passed by a vacant lot and thought, what if? What if these spaces can be transformed into something positive and beneficial for the community? In this presentation, we're exploring the potential of these neglected lots and identifying the barriers to transform them into thriving community gardens. To start with the big picture, did you know that about 15% of land in US cities are either vacant or abandoned? That's the size of Switzerland. Now let's zoom into Chicago. Chicago has over 30,000 vacant lots, with about 1/3 of these lots being city-owned. That's about over 10,000 of lots, almost all in South Side and West Side. Vacant lots can be a challenge for the communities and for our cities. They may increase illegal dumping of trash. They may attract vandalism, contributing to the decline in overall safety of our neighborhoods, and they may decrease property values, discouraging potential buyers or renters. However, transformation and restoration of these vacant lots into quality green spaces and community gardens will have immense benefits. It offers access to healthy, fresh food, both on temporary basis and long-term basis, which is crucial, especially in communities experiencing food insecurity. Involving communities in local spaces can foster a sense of community as well as well-being and immobilize social capital. This transformation also impacts people's safety. In Philadelphia, Restoration of 541 vacant lots revealed that residents living near those transformed lots reported 39% decrease in vandalism, 69% improvement in mental health, and 29% reduction in gun violence. Think about it for a second. 69% improvement in mental health and 29% reduction in gun violence. So what programs are in place to make this transformation happen in Chicago? Shy Block Builder, as you see in this picture, is the city's program to encourage purchase and redevelopment of public vacant lots. There are 5 categories, depending on the eligible land uses, as you see: urban agriculture, housing, side yard development projects, and open spaces. Now, with the Shy Block Builder in mind, let's focus on the aim of this study, which is about to identify barriers to transform city-owned vacant lots into community gardens in Woodlawn, south side of Chicago. As you see here, Woodlawn has over 800 city-owned vacant lots. I conducted interviews and focus group with key stakeholders and members of community gardens in Woodlawn to gain invaluable perspective on identifying barriers to this transformation. And here are some key findings. During our conversation, almost all of the attendees mentioned there is a need to address lack of outreach and boost the program visibility through different activities such as engaging with the schools and churches, and also utilizing social media as well as direct mail to household. We also need to emphasize the positive impact of vacant lots in our neighborhoods. One of the interviewees mentioned, quote, "Somebody in the community has walked past these their whole life and they see this as something bad. We need to showcase the potential for these vacant lots," unquote. We also need to enhance innovative programs and funds in these lots. Introducing innovative programs such as using tax credit as a form of carbon credit can enable communities to facilitate this transformation. This funding could be used to enhance infrastructure, invest in water equipment, and/or implementing solar panels. We also need to address lack of transparency on the existing lots for sale. Community members expressed concern about the lack of transparency regarding the available lots for sale. There is a need to make the community aware of what's available, especially given the Woodlawn's status as a hotspot for developers due to recent changes such as recent development, such as construction of the Obama Center. Last but not least, it's essential to advocate for a comprehensive community development, because listing only available lots for sale without having a strategic plan may transfer the problem to others and may result in recurring challenges. Previous data shows that when the land was sold to the residents, what happens most of the time was that they may not be able to pay taxes and other expenses, and the land goes back into the inventory. We need to think about long-term sustainability of this transformation. In closing, I'd like to invite you as planners, and also specifically next generations of planners, to think creatively about how these neglected, unloved spaces, known as vacant lots, can be transformed into the hubs of activity, improving the future of Chicago. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Christian Diaz. I'm the Director of Equitable and Sustainable Communities for Palenque LSNA. We are an organization led by immigrant moms. Okay. Oop, how do I go back? There we go, thank you. We are an organization led by immigrant moms, by youth of color, by pastors and principals, and teachers and white allies. Our work is based in Logan Square, Avondale, Hermosa, Humboldt Park. We believe the future of Chicago must be intersectional. It's no secret that Logan Square is a gentrifying community, but I make a point of distinction that we are gentrifying and not gentrified. Logan Square is sometimes discussed as a lost cause to gentrification. This is a harmful narrative that erases the work of my people who have led social movements for decades to keep our neighborhood. Logan Square is not a lost cause. We're here to stay. Pictured here is me and my mother. My mother brought me to this country, to Chicago, when I was a baby. We were in search of a better life. Growing up, I knew my mom missed her home, her family, her culture. But we found a way to make Logan Square feel like home. My parents bought a 3-flat in Logan Square in the 90s, and that's where I grew up. My cousins lived in the first floor and the basement unit. We had other cousins next door and nearby, but we never forgot Mexico. My mom would tell me stories of her plaza in Tepatitlan, and eventually I would get to visit and see it for myself. The plaza was always alive with music, with art, with small vendors, with children, with food. Anyone who's been to Latin America knows how important the plaza is to the community. What I didn't know then is that one day, Logan Square would redesign its streetscape and that the opportunity would come to advocate for a plaza here in Chicago. I want to live in a Chicago where all people have the opportunity to succeed in school and in life, and that means having access to an affordable home, to an equitably funded education, and a safe, walkable neighborhood with access to public transit. However, we are far from this vision, and in reality, we planned for this. We live in a racial apartheid. This social hellscape that we live in was designed intentionally by planners and policymakers. Only when we admit this can we move toward an equitable future in Chicago. The future of Chicago must be intersectional, so we need a new kind of urban planning. I challenge everyone here today to wrestle with the intersections of oppression that manifest in our built environment. In 2018, we heard rumors that the city was going to invest $20 million to redesign our streets in Logan Square. At the same time, we had a giant city-owned parking lot right in the heart of our community. This was at the height of gentrification. In 2017, Logan Square had the highest rate of demolitions in the city and the highest rent increases. We had large buildings get bought by corporations, and everyone in that building would get a 30-day eviction notice slipped under their door, and this was happening over and over and over. Between 2000 and 2020, more than 20,000 Latinx people were displaced from Logan Square. At the same time, 400,000 Black residents were displaced from the city. This immense suffering in Chicago, whether in a gentrifying or a disinvested community, is extremely profitable. We have an economy that is based and organized around the suffering of Black and Latina people, and this didn't come to be on its own. The United States planned for this. The racial apartheid we live in was designed intentionally. Redlining, restrictive covenants, highways, suburbs, segregation, and now gentrification, this is the legacy of urban planners. The field of planning needs to change. We cannot save the planet through urbanism unless there is solidarity and intersectionality. Today, when we say we need more affordable housing, planners tell us we need upzones, which means deregulation of the housing market, which means more power for private corporate developers and more displacement. When we say we need public transit to be actually public, to be free, planners tell us we need governance reform, and we can deal with the equity question later. When we say we need our streets to be safe, planners say we need to lower speed limits and add more bike lanes, ignoring how lower speed limits would lead to more people getting stopped by the police. Where are the intersectional planners? Where are the planners who work in solidarity with historically marginalized people? In order to save the planet, what we truly need is intersectional urbanism. Intersectionality is a term coined by legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, which refers to the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, and gender, which create overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. Without a conscious effort to challenge existing power dynamics and center marginalized voices, urban planning risks further entrenching inequities rather than mitigating them. The future of Chicago, and indeed all cities, must be intersectional, because look at what is possible when the city plans in solidarity with our people. The future of Logan Square had been determined. We were set to become the next Lincoln Park, the next Wicker Park, neighborhoods that became exclusively white. But because of the work of Palenque LSNA leaders, Logan Square will have 200 affordable homes in its center, and a placita that was designed with the immigrant community and for the immigrant community. And this means a better city for everyone. I look forward to the day when I can call my mom on a Sunday morning and say, vamos a la placita. And then we can walk 5 minutes and enjoy a public space that feels like home. Logan Square is a case study in what intersectional urbanism can look like. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon. Hi, everyone. My name is Aisha Kazi Lampert, and it is truly such an honor to be learning from hundreds of young people every single day at Northside College Prep. I teach AP Environmental Science, and it is surreal to see young students from our school in this forum right now. And we engage in this journey together of taking public transit. We took the Brown Line, we ended up taking the 8 bus all the way over here. It was a 1.5-hour journey of truly understanding our public infrastructure. And as an educator, it made me really consider, how are we educators engaging and reflecting on these shared experiences and journeys that we take to our educational institutions? And we know that our journeys to our schools are going to be impacted by extreme weather events. And how are we engaging with our youth, an important user of our school buildings, and reimagining what climate-resilient school campuses look like? We are aware that the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, recently reported that climate change impacts in the Midwest are going to include frequent and extreme weather events. Specifically in Chicago, we're going to see extreme heat waves and torrential rainfall, which means we're going to see further environmental degradation, or we are really challenging the integrity of the materials within our buildings and our surrounding campus. So we're further increasing those risks. And a lot of our school leaders and district officials, they're thinking about these emergency environmental mitigation plans. And I want us to think about, where are youth voices in those plans? How are we bringing youth into that conversation? And so where can we start? And I would argue it would be our Chicago Public Schools, our school district. So our school district serves hundreds of schools, and we're talking about hundreds and thousands of students that are connected to their immediate community. And so the image that you're seeing here, students within the 5 sections of AP Environmental Science, they reimagined what our school street looked like. And we're using just cardboard and pom-poms and toothpicks and glue guns, and that's really it. And you can learn a lot from our youth. So I would encourage folks that are nearby a school campus, whether you're going to be involved in a local LSC or if you're just involved in your school community, to think about those shared experiences, the shared experience of going from one school campus to the next. And these journeys are going to change. And we have to be prepared, and we have to find ways to set the pathways and foundations for our young people to speak up and share what that future looks like. Our students are our main stakeholders. They are in those schools day in and day out. And I understand in the high school, they may only be there for about 4 years, but they have a lot to say, and we can learn a lot from them. And so the image that you're seeing here on the right side, we have students analyze the entrances and exits of Northside and start to think about, where do we see a lot of users in that space? Where do we start to see a lot of that harm taking place? What are students afraid of? How can we reimagine this entryway towards our school? And so the image that you're seeing on the bottom right, you're seeing a lot more concrete, present, and students notice that, these gaps that we can reimagine together. And having students engage in this collecting of data and realizing that quantitative data is pretty important, but telling that story is just as important, and engaging in these visioning sessions. I am so lucky and honored to engage in that space day in and day out. I'm inspired, despite climate doomism, and I know that exists, and we all experience it to some level and degree, but we also have to engage in climate optimism together, and we have to engage in visioning sessions, and we have to understand what multimodal communication looks like. So in my classroom, I have students who are very artistic. I have students who are pretty vocal. I have students that, models may be a best way to show what that can look like. And I have students who write stories. I went back. I am so sorry. That was not supposed to happen. Red button. Thank you. There we go. This is the image I want to show. So students recently constructed these models about a week ago. And it is amazing to see what students are thinking about when it comes to green spaces, when they're thinking about permeable surfaces, having students really apply content knowledge that we cover in environmental science class. So we're thinking about nature-based solutions, we're thinking about energy-based solutions, and we're thinking about how do we engage in safer streets together. And I encourage those who are with young people day in and day out to really think about the pathways to success. And how do we really elevate and uplift those voices? It's an honor to experience and hear those stories. We share those stories when we're at work day to day. Like, hey, it was a lot, it was hard for me to get to work. I'm seeing that on the ground as a teacher. I'm seeing the tardies happen. And so I want us to think about, if schools are meant to serve students, what are the pathways we are setting to uplift young people and the visions that they have about our school campus? Thank you. I am sorry, this clicker's on.
Hi, everybody. I recognize I'm one of the last things standing between you and happy hour, so I'm going to try and be extra on time. Hi, my name is Kelsey, and I'm the keeper of Mental Landscapes, a body of independent scholarship that centers depression and psychological disability in park and outdoor space design. Depression is not only a psychological disability. Depression can be a biological and rational response to life conditions that may impact a person at any point, such as the death of a loved one, loss of work, health, or sense of purpose, displacement from a home, or experiences of violence, discrimination, or poverty. I grew up in the shadow of family histories marked by psychological disability and suicide, trying to understand the tumultuous nature of mental illness, its generational impact, and the way these narratives are communicated or silenced. I spent a decade living with undiagnosed major depression episodes myself until I was diagnosed with a mood disorder in 2020. While receiving this diagnosis in the midst of a global pandemic and racial justice uprisings, living alone and working from home, my symptoms became unmanageable. Through these episodes, I walked to the park near my house almost every day for a year. It became the lens through which I could understand my mental state. On good days, the park made me feel joyful and brought me relaxation. On days when I was having a difficult time, the park made me feel alone and confused. Recognizing these trends in myself as a professional parks planner made me ask if what I was experiencing could possibly be true. That who we are when we enter into a space, that our fluctuating mental states can really perceive or alter our perception of how we influence and understand that space. And if this could be true, how could we design spaces with these fluctuations at the center? Could depression and other forms of psychological disability be portals into better ways of designing care in public spaces? I believe the answer is yes. And Chicago, with over 600 parks, has the opportunity to be the first city in the country to initiate this type of paradigm shift. To get at these questions, I shared an interview intake and consent form on my social networks a few years ago, asking if anyone with a history of depression who's also a park and public space user would talk with me. I ended up interviewing 25 people across the United States and Canada, and found that to begin designing parks and public spaces with depression as a lens, we need to use several key design amendments. I use design amendments instead of principles because very little about how we understand and design with depression is really a fundamental truth. With this in mind, the core design amendments are ease, observation, affinity, and awe. Ease refers to a sense of peace and comfortability, ways in which parks and public spaces can reduce anxiety, rumination, and fear or panic. Ease asks, how might we incorporate the healing aspects of water? How might we reimagine site furnishings to convey feelings of safety and being held? Observation refers to feeling a part of a space without necessarily needing to actively contribute to its rhythms. Ways in which parks and public spaces can reduce paranoia and social withdrawal. Observation asks, how might we reimagine seating and layout to support protected passive observation? How might we set new cultural standards for presence and attention in urban environments? Affinity refers to the gravitation life has towards life, the relationship between humans and the natural world, ways in which parks and public spaces can reduce isolation and rumination. Affinity asks, how might we connect to the flora and fauna with whom we share space? How might we incorporate and encourage tactile relationships and grounding practices to land? Awe refers to a sense of wonder and serendipity, ways in which parks and public spaces can reduce withdrawal and despair. Awe asks, how might we signal invitation for connection? How might we spark appreciation for seasonal change? How might we uphold play as having value, especially for adults? The design of park and public spaces ultimately requires a paradigm shift from simply relying on the provision of these spaces to prevent depression to addressing the inevitability of the condition, creating and reimagining spaces that comfort, support, and accompany people through mental health experiences over the course of their lives. For mental landscapes to flourish in Chicago, many disciplines and communities need to conspire to explore how these amendments can track more explicitly based on citizenship status, race, housing status, age, gender, neighborhood, and across the urban-rural divide. Mental landscapes is a vision of community where the commons are intentionally designed to accompany and reconnect us with our bodies, each other, and the natural world, even on our hardest days. This is not just about applying a design lens, even though it takes root there. This is climate resilience work, racial healing work, economic justice work, and spiritual work, all of which we are capable of together and we can use to foster a healthier Chicago. Thank you.
We welcome you now. Please direct your attention to the screens for a video message from the City of Chicago Mayor, Brandon Johnson.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brandon Johnson, Mayor of the greatest city in the world, the City of Chicago. I commend you all for gathering at UIC's annual Urban Forum to discuss the future of our communities. It will take all of us, from government, nonprofits, the arts and culture community, the business community, educational institutions, and more, to build a more inclusive and thriving city. My administration is committed to unifying our city so that we can all work together towards a better, stronger, and much safer Chicago. With sustained and long-term investments in the people and community areas of Chicago that have been historically disinvested in, we hope to address the systemic inequities that contribute to our city's most pressing challenges of poverty, violence, and trauma. And it means creating a stronger mental health safety net so that our residents are connected to the care that they need and can contribute to our vibrant community. These are just a few of my administration's priorities that speak to the vision that I have for the city of Chicago. Of course, we must do this work while confronting the challenges of climate change, immigration, and our aging infrastructure. And that is why our collaboration in this moment is so important. We all share a vision for Chicago that is more inclusive and more resilient and globally connected. Only by working together and combining our talents and strengths can we harness our city's assets and build out our future. I hope that the UIC Urban Forum is an inspirational first step into our great city's next 50 years of growth and prosperity. I look forward to working with many of you in the future to achieve our bold vision. Thank you for your commitment to the greatest city in the world, the City of Chicago.
We very much appreciate those words from Mayor Johnson. We're nearing the end of our program. Just want to do a quick shout out to our Dean Emeritus, Michael Pagano, who's in the room, who helped really set up this. There he is in the back. Hey, Mike. And I'm just shouting him out because before he retired, he was in this role, Program Director of Urban Forum, and helped institutionalize this as a space for the great dialogue and presentations that we've heard today. But with that, from our previous dean to our current dean, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Dean Stacy Swearingen-White, who will close out our program. She joined the College of Urban Planning and Public Affairs in 2022, from the University of Kansas, where she began her career as an assistant professor of urban planning, served as the chair of the planning department there. And her research focuses on sustainability innovation at the local level, including an emphasis on water quality and campus sustainability. She studied even the role of emotions in planning, which is fantastic. Her research and teaching interests reflect her interdisciplinary training with a BA in philosophy from Emory and an MS in environmental studies, and a PhD in land resources from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Dean White, please take us home.
Thank you, Joe. And I want to thank the lightning speakers. That event was really tremendous. So thanks to all of you. So there's so much about even tomorrow's future that we can't predict, let alone 50 years from now. But there's at least 3 things that I know with certainty as we wrap up what has been just a terrific urban forum today. The first is that this event and the engaging conversations I know are going to follow would not have been possible without the hard work of many people. And in particular, I want to thank Rachel Weber, yay Rachel, who really did so much to put this program together, Sanjeev Vidyarthi, the department head of urban planning and policy, Joe Horath, director of the Institute for Policy and Civic Engagement and director of the forum, and then last but not least, Jenny Sweeney, our event planner, who always does such a great job. So thanks to all of you in making today such a great success. The second thing I know with certainty is that the next 50 years of CUPPA's urban planning and policy department is poised to be every bit as impactful as the first 50. As Mayor Johnson just shared, and as you heard from today's various speakers and panels, Chicago has its share of challenges, as does every city, but it has so many opportunities. And with the clear-eyed commitment and compassion and energy and talent of those in urban planning and policy, and those in the audience here today who care so much about this city, there's a lot of reasons to be hopeful. So congratulations to UPP. Along with Chicago, you have a bright future ahead. And then the third and last thing I'm certain of, because I am the last thing between you and the reception, is I should not talk too long at the end of an inspiring event. So I'm going to leave you with a couple housekeeping items and an invitation to continue to engage with us in the future. So first of all, please stay around and visit, if you can, with our panelists. They will be here for a bit and happy to talk with you and answer any questions. For those of you who have tickets for tonight's event celebrating the Urban Planning 50th, there will be shuttle buses leaving from the east side of this building on Halstead Street at 5:30 and 6 o'clock to take you to that venue. And then finally, thank you all for coming today and taking the time out of your day to participate here with us. I hope you feel as energized and recommitted to the work as I do. So let's go out and invent that future that we all want to see together. Thank you.